He built the most powerful entertainment empire in sports history. Billions of dollars, global reach, absolute control. And then, one document destroyed everything. Not his business rival or any failed deal, but a secret document, signed, paid, and buried for years, until it wasn't. This is the Vince McMahon hush money scandal, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the most powerful man in professional wrestling fell, not in a ring, but in a federal courthouse. And the worst part of this story hasn't even started yet. The document. In June 2022, the Wall Street Journal published a report that hit WWE like a chair shot no one saw coming. The journal revealed that Vince McMahon, then chairman and CEO of WWE, had secretly paid $3 million to a former female employee to keep her quiet. Her name was not released. The details were sealed. But the money was real. What was the payment for? According to the journal, it was to suppress allegations of a sexual relationship between McMahon and this former employee, a relationship that began while she worked directly under him at WWE. $3 million, paid quietly, without the knowledge of WWE's board of directors. That alone was already a corporate governance disaster. A public company, a CEO writing personal checks to silence employees. The board had no idea. But here's where it gets worse. The journal didn't stop at $3 million. Within days of that first report, they published a follow-up. McMahon hadn't just paid one woman. He had paid multiple women over multiple years. The total figure? Allegedly over $12 million, paid to at least 4 women to suppress misconduct allegations spanning more than 16 years. 16 years. Multiple women, millions of dollars, all buried. And every single year during that time, Vince McMahon sat at the head of a publicly traded company, smiling at shareholders, running pay-per-views, doing WrestleMania entrances, while this was all happening underneath. Hold on, because what the board does next is something you need to see. The board reacts, and Vince steps down. The moment the Wall Street Journal story dropped, WWE's board of directors launched an internal investigation. They brought in outside legal counsel. They started pulling records. On June 17, 2022, just days after the story broke, Vince McMahon voluntarily stepped back from his role as WWE chairman and CEO while the investigation proceeded. His daughter, Stephanie McMahon, stepped in as interim co-CEO alongside longtime WWE executive Nick Khan. But here's the part that tells you everything about how Vince operates. Even after stepping back from the CEO chair, he still showed up. He still attended meetings. He still gave creative direction. Because Vince McMahon was not just the CEO of WWE. He was WWE. His name was on the building. His fingerprints were on every decision. Stepping aside from a title doesn't erase that kind of power. And then, in what shocked the industry, McMahon didn't quietly disappear. In July 2022, just weeks after the scandal broke, he announced his retirement, full retirement, done. The wrestling world went quiet. Nobody had ever imagined this moment. Vince McMahon, 76 years old, walking away from the company he built from scratch. Done. Except he wasn't done, not even close. The comeback and the sale. January 2023, Vince McMahon comes back. He announced he was returning to WWE's board, not as CEO, but as executive chairman. His stated reason? To oversee a potential sale of the company. Stephanie McMahon resigned shortly after his return. Triple H, who had been quietly running creative, retained his role. But the power dynamic in the room had shifted back. Within months, McMahon engineered the sale of WWE to Endeavor Group, the talent agency and sports conglomerate that also owns UFC. The deal valued WWE at approximately $9.3 billion. The merged entity was called TKO Group Holdings. McMahon personally held a significant equity stake. He made a fortune. But even as the ink dried on one of the biggest deals in sports entertainment history, federal investigators were already circling. Because the hush money payments weren't just a corporate scandal anymore. They had become a federal investigation. The federal case opens. January 2024. The story exploded again, and this time it wasn't the Wall Street Journal. It was a federal lawsuit. Former WWE employee Janel Grant filed a civil complaint with allegations that rewrote everything. McMahon had trafficked her for sex, shared her with Laurinaitis and other men, psychologically manipulated and coerced her over years, and when she tried to leave, he used the NDA she had signed as a weapon to keep her silent. McMahon resigned from TKO the same day the lawsuit dropped, January 26, 2024. But here's where it crosses from corporate misconduct into criminal territory. Federal investigators, including the FBI, launched a criminal probe focused specifically on potential sex trafficking violations under federal law. We're not talking about a settlement or a fine. We're talking about federal prison. McMahon's legal team called the lawsuit fiction. They attacked Grant's credibility. They said he would fight every word of it. The investigation didn't slow down, and at this point, the entire industry was asking the same question. How did this go on for so long inside one of the most scrutinized companies in entertainment? That answer is uncomfortable, and it starts with the culture McMahon himself built. The culture that enabled the fallout. WWE wasn't just a company Vince McMahon ran. It was a structure built around one man's will. Creative, contracts, talent relations, television deals, personal careers, all of it flowed through him. That kind of consolidated power creates a specific dynamic. People don't speak up. They can't afford to. A wrestler who crosses Vince McMahon doesn't just lose a match. They lose their push, their spot, their income. The same logic applied to every employee in that building. The NDAs weren't unusual by Hollywood standards, but multiple payments, multiple women, over 16 years. That's not a mistake. That's a system. And a system requires infrastructure, lawyers, accountants, people who process checks and know exactly where the money goes. The institutional fallout confirmed exactly that. WWE's board conducted an investigation in 2022, but critics noted it was internal, not truly independent. McMahon was allowed to return to the board months later. Governance watchdogs raised alarms. And yet the Endeavor deal closed. TKO was formed. Revenue kept climbing. Live events sold out. Sponsors largely stayed, which tells you something brutal about how accountability actually works in a billion-dollar machine. The audience kept watching. The product didn't blink. Because what McMahon built was bigger than him. And that same size is exactly what protected him for so long. Where things stand. Here's where this story sits right now, and it is far from over. In January 2025, federal prosecutors announced they were dropping the criminal investigation into Vince McMahon. His attorney released a statement saying the investigation had definitively concluded and will not result in charges. McMahon himself called it a vindication. He publicly claimed the entire federal inquiry amounted to nothing more than minor accounting errors with regard to some personal payments. That statement aged badly, fast. Sworn deposition testimony from WWE President Nick Khan, taken in December 2025 as part of a shareholder merger lawsuit in Delaware Chancery Court, directly contradicted McMahon's characterization. Khan testified under oath that the DOJ's criminal investigation had included possible violations of sex trafficking statutes, not accounting errors. Sex trafficking statutes. Those are two very different things. Also in January 2025, the SEC settled charges against McMahon, the same charges related to the concealed hush money payments. He was ordered to pay a $400,000 penalty and repay WWE $1.3 million. McMahon paid the fine and moved on. But the civil lawsuit, Janel Grant's case, is still very much alive. The case is actively moving through federal court as of 2026, with pre-trial proceedings underway and no settlement reached. Fact discovery closed in December 2025. Trial is currently scheduled for June 2026. Grant recently posted to Instagram letters she received from the FBI's victim notification system, confirming she received those letters continuously between May 2023 and December 2025, identifying her as a possible victim of a crime in an active federal investigation. So let's be clear about where this actually stands. No criminal charges were filed. McMahon avoided prison. He paid a fine to the SEC, called it accounting errors, and tried to close the chapter. But under oath, in a separate courtroom, his own former colleague confirmed the DOJ was investigating sex trafficking. The civil trial is scheduled, the evidence is still being argued, and the woman at the center of it all is still fighting. Vince McMahon is not in handcuffs, but he is not free either, not legally, not reputationally. The June 2026 civil trial will be the next major moment, and depending on what comes out in that courtroom, this story could turn again. So, Vince McMahon didn't just build an empire. He built a system where his behavior survived for 16 years. And with a civil trial scheduled for June 2026, it's still not over. If this hit different, subscribe, because the next one is bigger. A company everyone trusted, a collapse nobody predicted. Drop in the comments, do you think Vince finds a way back, or is this finally the end? See you in the next one.